Revelation Foundation. Thank you for making it possible.
Hello and good evening. Welcome to this live Israeli election special programme in which we'll be providing analysis on the Israeli election. And it looks like the polls have now closed, but my studio guest is a good friend of mine on the Middle East Report, Robin Shepherd. Robin, it's great to have you on this programme, particularly as it's live and we're covering the Israeli election. So thank you for being with me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Firstly, Robin, I have to say that the articles that you write on The Commentator are excellent. So it's important that we are informed and educated on issues that affect Britain, that affect Europe, and also affect Israel as well. Can you share a little bit about the type of articles that you write on The Commentator and some of the other excellent writers you have there?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, The Commentator, which, and since you are plugging it, you can find at www.thecommentator.com. Basically is designed to cover a wide range of issues, mainly opinion articles from a whole range of authors. It also has some news articles too, and it has a blog. But basically, it's sort of the central mission when I set it up is to be in defence of Western values, of Western civilization. And that doesn't mean we don't cover British politics. We don't cover all sorts of issues aside from that. But we do an awful lot on Israel. We do a lot on Islamism, on Islam. We do a lot on the civilizational challenge being mounted within Europe itself, and interestingly, not necessarily by the Islamist population, the Muslim population, but by very large sections of the mainstream, which seems to have lost confidence in itself. So, you know, if you look through The Commentator, you'll find any number of articles on those kind of subjects, and we'll be delighted to have people take a look and see for themselves.
And also, just to remind you, this is a live and interactive programme, so we'd love your views and your comments on the Israeli elections. And in front of me now I have the Times of Israel, which headline is Netanyahu declares a victory, but Herzog is in no hurry to concede. Likud ahead or level with the Zionist Union in all three exit polls, better place to build a coalition. And look at this for a turnout. 71.8% turnout. The highest since 1999. Delight in Likud, dismay in Zionist Union, and Jewish homes slips. So there we go. We can pack up tonight. That's our analysis. No, only joking. Robin, I mean, just look at that turnout. 71%, almost 72% of the Israeli electorate voted in these elections. And it just shows the strength of Israeli democracy, which is the only true democracy in the Middle East. And surely many Western nations would love to have voter turnouts like the one we've seen in Israel today.
They absolutely would, and it's not just the turnout, which of course is very impressive. It's the range of views expressed. I mean, you can go from right to left, you can go up and down, you can find individuals who have particular charisma, others that don't. You know, Israel is a very diverse country, and despite what people may have gleaned from following a lot of the Western media, the main issues in this election were the kind of issues that are going to be present to people in the British election, which is the cost of living crisis, real wages, jobs, the health system, a whole range of things. One particular one that anybody who lives in Britain, especially in London, will be aware of is the absolute almost inability of even pretty well-off families to buy property, to get on the property ladder. These are the issues that energise Israel, because Israel is a normal country, albeit one operating in a very abnormal region and broader environment. Now, that isn't to say that the Palestinian question, the wider Middle East, the Iranian nuclear issue, and all sorts of other issues in international relations aren't relevant too, but the average Israeli voter, takes these issues, the security issues, as something of a given, which doesn't mean they dismiss them as something to be trivialised. It's very important. But essentially, they are voting on the issues that other voters vote on in advanced democracies, of which Israel is a leading example.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at Israelis voting this morning in Israel's general election.
Joining us for CBN Newswatch, I'm Ephraim Graham. It is a big day in Israel. Voters are heading to the polls for the country's parliamentary election after a heated 3-month campaign. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu cast his ballot this morning, and he made a last-minute pledge to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state.
In order to prevent the left-wing parties from governing, there is just one thing that needs to be done: to close the gap between Likud and Labour and to vote for Likud.
Meanwhile, his opponent, Isaac Herzog, led by the Zionist Union, says if he's elected, he would push for peace talks with Iran.
No Israeli leader will ever accept a nuclear Iran. However, the way to deal with it, that's where I beg to differ with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I believe in open, frank discussions with the U.S. administration.
Earlier this month in Washington, Netanyahu met with the United States Congress calling for more sanctions on Iran. Netanyahu is seeking his 4th term as prime minister. It could be weeks before a new government is formed. And we'll have the results of the election online tonight, including coverage from our Jerusalem bureau. So be sure to check that out. It's at cbnnews.com.
As you see, CBN doing a superb job in covering these elections, particularly with anchorman Chris Mitchell. Robin, I have to say that my first initial reaction from all the Western media, whether watching the mainstream media, be it Sky or BBC, everyone was indicating that Netanyahu was going to lose this election, that the Zionist Union that was led by Isaac Herzog of the Labour Party in union with Tzipi Livni's party, Kadima, would win this election. And now it appears that Netanyahu is now in the strongest position to form a national unity government, effectively saying that he's actually won this election, which is pretty much against all the odds that we heard here in Britain and probably throughout the Western world.
Well, whether it's called a unity government or whether it's a centre-right coalition, it does look at this stage that Netanyahu is in the leading position, to say the least. I mean, he himself has declared victory for Likud. All across the political spectrum in Israel, it's recognised that by far the most likely outcome is for Netanyahu to remain as Prime Minister. Swing over to the Western media, and I was just watching the BBC and also watching Sky, and it looks as though that some of those reporters have actually fallen into a fit of depression about this, and the fact that they were essentially predicting that Netanyahu was going to find it extremely difficult to remain Prime Minister was not so much a prediction as an expression of hope on their part. And the fact is that much of the Western media and also many of the chancelleries of Europe, not to mention the White House, simply did not want Benjamin Netanyahu to remain as Prime Minister. They effectively interfered in Israeli internal affairs. It obviously didn't make a scrap of difference to the Israeli electorate, which voted for the parties that they wanted to vote for.
So, really what it came down to really is that the whole focus of Netanyahu's re-election campaign has been one on security. I know that his main challenger, Isaac Herzog, focused a lot on social issues, particularly with the cost of living and the cost of food prices. But Netanyahu really focused on the issue of security, and I guess when it came down to it, that the majority of Israelis voting felt much better placed to have Netanyahu in power to ride out those storms that we're seeing right across the Middle East as their man to ride out this storm. What does that say about the Israeli electorate and how they see themselves and also the region in which they live in?
Well, I mean, the Likud has social and economic policies as well, of course, and those appeal to, as a centre-right party, they appeal to the kind of people that are easily appealed to with centre-right platforms, in the same in Britain and in Germany and the United States. the security issue is something that he played hard on, but it's something that he's already very, very trusted on in Israel. So it's going to be very interesting to see when we get, and we haven't even got the votes in yet, but when we actually get the breakdown, the surveys of the groups of people and why they voted for different political parties, whether in fact it is true that that was the defining reason that they voted for him. It's certainly true, as you say, that he made a big play of that, but whether that was what actually swayed Israelis to stay with him or to just bump him up and keep him in position is going to be very difficult to say. But he is strong on security. He has no problem, of course, even contradicting the American president. And much as Israel has to play a very careful game with the United States as its most important ally, this isn't the 1950s, the 60s, or the 70s anymore. Israel is a much stronger country independently than it has ever been. And so security is vital. I think the big security issue that really matters and that may actually have swayed people in the campaign is Iran, because it's so imminent, it's so likely that the Western powers could actually get this wrong, that Netanyahu's recent speech in the American Congress, I think, will have told many Israelis that, yes, this is somebody who will stand up for Israel and won't simply cave into pressure when Israel's vital national security interests are at stake.
Now, one thing you know about Israel, that it may be a small country, but it's a very dynamic country. It's a very complicated country, and you'll see from this excellent explanation of how Israel's political system works. So this is Israel in a nutshell, produced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry.
What's the Knesset?
The Knesset is Israel's parliament. It's where all important issues are hotly debated and laws are made.
You don't elect a president?
No. Israel is a parliamentary democracy. That means that citizens elect representatives to the Knesset, and the prime minister is chosen among those Knesset members.
So who do people vote for?
They vote for the party they like, not individual candidates.
Do they vote for representatives of their city or district?
Israel is very small, so the whole country is a single constituency. The 120 Knesset seats are divided proportionally to the number of votes that each party wins.
Do you have a lot of parties?
Yes, Israel is a very diverse country, and Israelis have very diverse opinions. In the last Knesset, there were 11 parties. But there is a basic threshold, meaning that each party must get at least 3.25% of the votes in order to enter the Knesset.
And who gets to become prime minister?
The prime minister is the leader of one of those parties.
The party that gets the most votes?
Usually, but not always. In Israel, no party ever got an overall majority of the Knesset seats. This means that the party leader who has the best chances of pulling together a viable coalition is chosen.
So who can run for office?
Every Israeli citizen over 21 can run, unless a court specifically restricted this right. Also, parties or candidates can be disqualified if they negate Israel's basic identity or incite to racism. That helps Israel's democracy protect itself.
So Arab citizens can be elected?
Of course. Many parties have Arab Israeli candidates on their list, and there are also parties composed entirely of Arab Israelis. Discrimination is forbidden by law in Israel. Actually, this year, the head of Israel's elections committee is an Arab Israeli Supreme Court judge.
Who can vote?
Every Israeli citizen over the age of 18.
So Arab citizens vote too?
Of course, every citizen. That means Jews, Muslims, atheists, Christians, Druze, Circassians, Baha'is, men, women, the list goes on and on.
Is it hard to vote?
No, Israel does everything possible to make the process fair and easy, and to encourage everyone to vote.
How?
Well, first of all, Election Day is a national holiday.
No work? No school?
No.
Cool. But do you have to travel far?
No. As I said, Israel is a very small country, and there are more than 11,000 polling stations.
What else makes it easy?
The Israeli system is low-tech and user-friendly. All you have to do is pick a small slip of paper with the 2 or 3 letters that symbolize your favorite party and seal it in an envelope.
And voting is completely free, fair, and secret?
Definitely. Israel strongly believes in freedom and democracy. Everything is done to ensure that all Israeli citizens are free to vote according to their own conscience.
So who's going to win?
Nobody knows. The only thing certain at this point is that Israeli democracy will win on Election Day.
So for this a live Israeli election special program tonight, we're now joined by Skype by Neil Lazarus from Awesome Seminars for an update from the situation in Israel. Good evening, Neil. It's great to have you on this special Israeli election program. And for our viewers, can you give us a little bit of an update on the sense of feeling there is in Israel now as the exit polls have closed, and it looks like Bibi Netanyahu's Likud party has just edged out the Zionist Union coalition?
Absolutely. Prior to the exit polls, and exit polls in Israel, very, very exciting. All the channels count down to when the polls close, and it's prime television time. And the exit polls show that both the Likud and the Zionist camp, otherwise known as the Labour Party in the past, are more or less neck and neck. Channel 2 showed that the Likud had 28 seats and the Zionist party had 27. Having said all of that, it's got nothing to do with who gets slightly more or slightly less. It's got everything to do with who can make a coalition.
So who can make a coalition? I mean, Israeli politics is very complicated. It's certainly not straightforward, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Not to go through every party, but basically if you put parties in groups of the left who favour giving up land for peace, the nationalist right who would believe in building in the West Bank, and the centre parties, first of all, the battle is really and has been for the centre ground in these elections. The bottom line is this: the National Zionist Party, the Labour Party, if you like, does not have enough seats to get over that magic number of 61. The only way Herzog would get into the government is if the Likud agreed to a national unity government. National unity government is where the Labour Party and the Likud sit together. On the other hand, Netanyahu has got another option. If it was a national unity government, it would mean that Netanyahu's government would be big, large, stable. It would have 77 seats. That's a lot over 61. He could go for, and that's what he indicated at the beginning of the elections, for a more narrow right-wing religious government, which would include Abait Yehudi, Shas, Kulano, etc., and that would bring him up to 63. The advantage is more right-wing religious and easier to control. The disadvantage is a government of only 63, which means if one party leaves, we're back to having elections again. In all of these scenarios, there is one party, the Kulano party, headed by a former communications minister, Kahlon, who holds the balance of power.
So can you tell us a little bit more about Kahlon's party and certainly their policies, and how did this party end up being in a position where they could be kingmakers, very much like Yapid's party in the previous election back in 2013?
Well, it's interesting. Again, Simon, I'm sure you remember, because you've been following this for a while, it used to be the case that we used to talk about the ultra-Orthodox holding the balance of power in Israel. That's no longer the case. Today, it's not the issue of the ultra-Orthodox, but rather these centralist new parties, whether it was Yesh Atid, Lapid's party last time, or Shelano of Kahlon this time. Kahlon was a former communications minister. He was the man who broke the monopoly of Israeli telephone companies. Sounds crazy, right?
Absolutely.
Palestinians, peace, Iran. The thing that got him the vote was that Israelis could phone and talk cheaply on their mobile phones. He absolutely revolutionized it. Has been seen as someone who can really take on board some of the big social issues here and economic issues, which includes the price of housing, the economy, the fact that food here is very expensive. And that made him very popular. He talks in the language of the Likud. He split away from the Likud, although he could have been tempted by the Labour Party on social policy. Netanyahu has promised him the finance ministry, which will be very attractive to forward his interests. Today he's a kingmaker. Tomorrow he could be back challenging even for the leadership of Likud.
Incredible. So what would you say were the key issues that shaped this year's general election in Israel?
There are a number of things. One, I come back to what I just mentioned, the socio-economic issues. That's one doesn't get covered abroad, which is quite fascinating. The internal issues, such as the price of living, the economy, housing, being able to afford your first house as a young couple, huge issue here. So socio-economics. Second of all, the threat of Iran, Hezbollah, what's happening on our borders, is also the security card which Mr. Security, Benjamin Netanyahu, if you like, played. So I think those were the two major elements. Now have a look. We're not talking about something which is important, which is the one of the big winners of this election, according to this exit poll that came out, is the Joint Arab League, the Joint Arab Party, Joint Arab List, sorry. They got 13 seats, according to this exit poll. That would make the Israeli Arab Party the third largest party in Israel. Now, the question is whether they can survive, whether they're already arguing, how would they act. But I think that's an element which is important to talk about because it's a change in Israeli politics as well.
What sort of changes would this be? And is there not a great concern, certainly with the Arab Israelis who are voting, that they could be influenced externally from some of Israel's enemies in the Arab world to push through or make life very difficult for the ruling coalition or for Israeli politics in general?
Well, put it this way. If they create a national unity government, the Likud and Labour sitting together in government has 77 seats. That doesn't make any difference regarding the Joint Arab League. The Joint Arab List. At the same time, if it's a right-wing nationalist government, they have 63, 64 seats. They've still got a majority. So I don't think it's going to be that effective. Especially if Netanyahu's making the government right now. You mentioned this thing of the fact of being influenced from abroad. That was one of the big accusations of Netanyahu against the Labour Party. We had a lot of NGOs, non-government organisations being created, including things such as Victory 15 and so on, which were putting a lot of money in the campaign against Netanyahu. His claim was that there was an attempt from abroad to try and bring him out of power. Having said that, one of the largest newspapers in Israel today, Yisrael Hayom, which supports Netanyahu, was also being sponsored from abroad. So how much that accusation is true, I let your viewers decide themselves.
Excellent. And finally, Neil, what do you think the reaction is going to be of Western governments, particularly here in Britain, in Europe and also in the United States, to the re-election of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
I think there's going to be disappointment. I think that certainly the crisis between Israel and America is now going to deepen. There's no secret that Netanyahu and Obama, it's a personal argument. The two leaders don't see eye to eye. That's an understatement. Europe is also going to be putting pressure on Israel. I remind you, Habayit Yehudi, the Jewish Home, is a party which supports building in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank. Europe is against the settlement policy. So I think that we're going to see, if we have a right-wing nationalist government, certainly increasing isolation of Israel. If it's a national unity government, then the Labour Party would try and water down some of those policies in the West Bank.
Neil, thank you so much that we're able to join with you today from Jerusalem, and thank you so much for your insight and expertise, particularly on this very special day, which is an Israeli election day.
The evening's not over. We're going to be staying up until late to watch for the real results, not just exit polls, to come out. And then we'll be able to look at the real maths. But thank you, and it's always a pleasure to be on your programme.
Thank you very much, Neil. Don't know how many of you noticed there, but I was actually wearing a different tie for that interview. And that's because we recorded that interview literally half an hour before we went live on air. And because Neil was doing some other interviews, paid work with other TV stations. So it was an absolute privilege to have him on today's election programme. I'm just going to read out a few of your emails. Please feel free to email in what you think of the Israeli elections and what do you think the re-election, if it turns out to be, of Benjamin Netanyahu as Israel's Prime Minister, securing a fourth term in office, which is pretty much unheard of in Israeli politics. This is an email that says, evenings and greetings in Christ. So who did they vote in? And this is from Wayne and Wendy. It looks at the moment, and because of Israeli elections, we're not going to know for a few days, but it very looks like Netanyahu has been re-elected. This one says, Simon, all those countries that are against Israel had better wake up and realise they're taking on God, and that's Catherine in Ireland. So thank you very much for your email, Catherine. I couldn't agree more with you. This email says from John, only wish I had a Prime Minister like Bibi Netanyahu. Keep up the good work. God bless you both. Couldn't agree more with you. If we had more leaders like Bibi Netanyahu, I don't think the world would be in the mess that it's in, quite frankly. This one says, and I'm going to read this email out shortly, but Robin, I have to ask you, what has been the response of the Palestinians to this Israeli election result as it's come in?
Well, it's interesting. I was just looking at the some comments from Saeb Erekat, who's a very well-known Palestinian Authority official. You'll have seen him many times on the BBC, on CNN, quoted in newspapers across the West. And, of course, he's interestingly, in contrast with the BBC, which is still running a story saying it's all neck and neck, he says, and I quote, "It is clear that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will form the next government." And his conclusion from that is that he's saying that he's threatening to renew Palestinian efforts to sue Israel in the International Court in The Hague. It's very disingenuous because whoever was elected, they were going to threaten to sue Israel in The Hague. This has been long-standing build-up of Palestinian policy to threaten Israel with this kind of measure as part of the whole global delegitimization strategy. But it's entirely predictable. As I say, I think the irony is that the Palestinians are calling it for Netanyahu and the BBC isn't.
Yeah, but what's so interesting, really, I think, if the world wakes up and then realises that the Israelis have re-elected Benjamin Netanyahu, you can only really grasp that the whole world has been against his re-election. The European Union, President Obama has very much intervened in this election campaign, hoping that Herzog, who has a fine pedigree behind him, for example, his late father was President of Israel. His uncle was the famous Israeli foreign minister and Israel's ambassador to the UN, Abri Ban, probably one of the finest spokesmen Israel's ever had in their history. And yet it seems that the Israelis have defied international public opinion and re-elected Bibi Netanyahu.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that, nobody elects a single party that's got any hope of becoming the sole party in government in any country, which has pretty much any country, which has proportional representation. But the fact is that the coalition of forces and the coalition of parties, which maintains the dominant position, so it seems, in Israeli politics, is the centre-right. And, regardless of that enormous hostility, yes, it was incredible. The international media, the Obama administration, it's no secret that it holds Netanyahu in disdain. What I was saying about this situation is that Israel is the pantomime villain among nation states, and Netanyahu is the pantomime villain among international leaders. He gets more opprobrium than the leader of North Korea. It's extraordinary. And it's also a product of denial, because Western countries and the Western media, broadly speaking, and the broader intelligentsia, they have this view that if only Israel would grow up and learn to recognise its own best interests, i.e. jettison Netanyahu, get somebody in who's more moderate, to use the terminology they would use, and more conciliatory and more constructive, then it would all be hunky-dory. We could sit down, sort out a deal with the Palestinians, wrap it up like a birthday present, put a little bow on it, and forget all about it, which is obvious nonsense. Since I became particularly interested in this whole issue, which is about the time of the Clinton Accords in 2000 and then the Second Intifada, the Palestinians, of course, rejected the two-state solution during that period. We've had governments led by Labour, by Kadima, and by Likud. And it hasn't made a scrap of difference to the demonisation campaign against Israel, and it hasn't made a scrap of difference to the Palestinians' rejection of every single peace deal involving a two-state solution that's put on the table. And that hasn't just been a product of the last 15 years. It's been a product of Israeli history going back, in fact, to a year before Israel was formally created in 1947 with the UN partition plan, which the Jewish-Israeli side accepted. That was a two-state solution. And the Palestinian side rejected and opted for violence. But that narrative, which is the historically accurate narrative, is something that is simply not present in the reporting in the Western media, which is why so many people are confused about the situation. And that feeds through to the political classes too, who simply have no idea what's going on in that country and in that region.
And thank you for those of you who've emailed and texted into the programme. This one is from Jess, who writes, Shalom Simon, my bro. There is a saying, man possesses but God deposes. Is very true. I firmly believe God has placed Netanyahu for such a time as these. And I'm so glad that he is the only politician who seems to be awake to the evil that is rising against Israel and indeed all Christians. May God bless him with his wisdom and discernment in the years ahead, and place a hedge of protection around him. Thank you, Simon, for all the true facts you get to us, and that's from Jess, so it's a pleasure. This one says, hi, Simon, great news. It looks like Netanyahu is going to be victorious. 2 reasons to be thrilled. 1, he's strong on defence, hence he's the right man for the job. Number 2, his re-election will irritate, frustrate and oppress the very pants off that pathetic, as you describe, puppet Obama. 3 cheers for Netanyahu, hooray, and God bless Jeff. Obviously not a Obama fan there. But really, if we look at the election campaign, and as I was saying earlier, I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu called for a snap election. I mean, he could have tried to extend his current coalition government, in which Yesh Atid party held the power, essentially. We know that Zivi Livni, who was also involved with her party Kadima in this coalition, wanted to undermine Netanyahu. Now, there's a sense and a feeling that if only Israel would concede a Palestinian state, go back to the negotiation table with the Palestinians, give them everything they want, then there would be peace. What do you think about the not only the political left in Israel, but the left, those who support Israel from the political left, believe in essentially that the peace process, the Palestinian state, is very much the be-all and end-all of this conflict?
Well, I think that what's interesting is it depends which part of the Israeli left you're looking at. If you're looking at the far left in Israel, you're talking about people who are extremely marginalised, those people, which are always quoted in the Western media, of course, who simply believe that Israel can just sit down and form a deal. I mean, it would be wonderful if Israel could do that. But the mainstream, the centre and centre-left, is actually very tough on security. They're nobody's idea of a wilting violet. Ehud Barak was one of Israel's most decorated generals. He was prime minister. He was also in the last government with Netanyahu. The idea that the Israeli left is simply going to sort of bend over for the Palestinians and take risks with Israeli security is unrealistic. However, there does seem to be a feeling that I think that the reason why they push this rhetoric is because they are aware, and it's not an unimportant consideration, that Israel must retain strong relations with the United States. Now, I think then being naive, because I don't think you can give anything to Barack Obama, really, but I think at least the rhetoric changed, and at least they go through the motions of a peace process with the Palestinians leading to a two-state solution, then that's in Israel's international interest, that they believe that from a diplomatic point of view. I don't think the Israeli left in general, the centre-left that is at all naive about the Palestinians. I mean, I mentioned a couple of moments ago the Second Intifada. That really destroyed the old Israeli left. There are a few remnants there who still believe that there's, a two-state solution could be achieved sometime soon. But even people like, I'm thinking of people like Shlomo Avineri, who was Deputy Foreign Minister, he's now a professor at the Hebrew University. He doesn't believe that there's any real prospect of a Palestinian state in the foreseeable future. And in reality, and I've said this to him, and he doesn't like it very much, but he's a fantastic guy, I should say. His position is not really that different in all practical senses from Netanyahu's. There is broad consensus in Israeli society that they can't take risks with their security. They know the things that aren't reported in Western media. They know that Mahmoud Abbas, who's described as a moderate, routinely glorifies terrorism. This is somebody who's a long-standing member of the PLO, has himself been involved in Holocaust denial, all sorts of relationships he must have been, of course, related to some terrorist activities, the Munich massacre. He's widely mooted as having been one of the financiers or the chief financiers of that. This is not somebody who's going to sit down and make peace. And yet he's heralded in the West as the great moderate hope of the Palestinians. So, look, you've got to get past the rhetoric and you've got to look at the reality. Labour governments, the Zionist Union, if they had been elected, and it is still theoretically possible, however unlikely, they're not simply going to take risks with Israeli security because, the Israelis understand the danger they're in and the politicians are from the people and of the people and they simply won't do it. The naivety comes in the West, and I just think there's a bit of bluster from people like Tzipi Livni and Herzog when it comes to trying to reassure the West that if they got into power, we could sort this all out. They can't, because it's not in their hands.
Because, if we look back historically, elections, it's been a long time, really, since the Labour Party has won an Israeli general election, not since Ehud Barak was Prime Minister. I think the election took place somewhere around it would have been probably 99, I think, when which is the highest turnout with this election. But essentially going back to the election of 99 that saw Ehud actually win the elections. Ehud Barak actually win those elections. So what it means really for the political left and those of the Labour Party is that there is an electoral consequence to actually having or sacrificing land for peace now, and there's that recognition. I think also going back to why some of Israel's diplomats and their diplomatic establishment in particular being very concerned or want to align themselves so much to the United States is because David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first Prime Minister, recognised the importance of Israel's survival in being closely associated with a world superpower, and they chose the United States during the Cold War. I just want to read out a couple more emails, so thank you for sending them on. This one says, in other words, Netanyahu plays on the fears rather than hope. Even Mossad's leaked document totally rebuked his Iranian bomb claims. The report highlights the huge gulf between the rhetoric of top Likud politicians and the assessment of Israeli military and intelligence services, and that's Miriam. Afraid, Miriam, the true answer to that question is that some of Israel's intelligence services, and certainly those who've headed up those intelligence services, have become very much involved in politics and political affairs, and there was very much almost a coup from some of them to actually get Netanyahu deposed and see Isaac Herzog as the next Prime Minister of Israel.
I think the thing is about, and this is often brought up about the intelligence chiefs. The intelligence chiefs are obviously, totally committed to Israel's security. They are people who have dedicated their lives to securing Israel, but they are what they are. They're not international diplomats. They don't have to deal with these major issues. They haven't had in their careers to deal with them. So, people cite the intelligence chiefs that have come out and said this sort of thing as if they have some sort of special knowledge, as though, they were living in a Jason Bourne or a James Bond film or something, and these sort of all-seeing, all-knowing people. Look, it's one point of view, and it's a legitimate point of view in the context of a democratic debate, but the Israeli people and most of the Israeli political and military establishment thinks differently. So, I think they're clutching at straws by pulling out these individuals who might be seen as having some sort of omniscience about the conflict. They have a point of view, which is fair for them to express, but that's all it is.
And let's have a little bit of fun now. So let's have a look at some of the election broadcast in Israel, which will give us a real insight into some of the issues and the way that this campaign was fought. The first one is by Naftali Bennett.
אוי, סליחה, אני ממש, אני לא התכוונתי, סליחה, אני מתנצל, אני ממש מתנצל. סליחה. סליחה, עליי, טעות שלי, אני מתנצל, אני מה זה מתנצל. אני באמת מתנצל. סליחה. אני ממש מתנצל, זה בסדר, תקחי. תודה. אני פה עם אופניים, אל תגיע. טוב, בסדר. צודקים. מהיום מפסיקים להתנצל. התפקדו עכשיו לבית היהודי. Sorry, you come to Israel, I hope everything okay, sorry. סליחה, אני מצטער, לא. סליחה, אני לא התכוונתי להפריע, באמת, לא. אני מתנצל, אני מצטער אני מתנצל, לא התכוונתי להפריע. לא, סליחה, אני לא רציתי להפריע, אבל זה בסדר, תשאירו, אל תשאירו, זה אני... סליחה, אני מתנצל. אני מתנצל. סליחה. מזל טוב. היום מתחתנים? לא, סליחה, אני מצטער. אני מתנצל שהפרעתי לכם. אבל באמת שיהיה במזל טוב. מה המצב? אני מתנצל. סליחה. התפקדו עכשיו לבית היהודי. אהלן.
And that was Naftali Bennett, his party, the Israel Home Party. I think he is the current serving housing minister in the last Israeli government. It'd be interesting to see if we saw any of our ministers of state appearing in such an advert like that. But I think he wanted to get the message home that we should be proud of being Israeli. We have nothing to apologise for. And I think those sentiments are true. I just want to thank you for emails and text messages coming into this programme. This one says, Dear Simon, I really feel the hand of God is in the result. The Israeli people need a person who is willing to stand up against those who are against Israel this time. And that's from Fiona Jean. Love all your programmes. Keep up the good work. So thank you very much, Fiona. This one says, evening and greetings to you both in Christ Jesus. So as none Jew can vote because the president needs to stay in. And we know in the spirit this is so, and all that what's happened is taken out. Okay, so I'm not quite sure that one meant. This one says, hi Simon, praying much that Bibi gets in again. Israel needs a strong character like Bibi to get in, and that's from Jill, so thank you. This one, I'll say this one. Shalom, been praying from Netanyahu that he remains. God has the final say for the Israeli elections, and my prayer is answered if Netanyahu is back, praise God. And just read out this one. This one says, hi Simon, I prayed that the Prime Minister Netanyahu would serve another term. God speak. God is shifting out and gathering his people. Those who come against Israel will be defeated, and that's blessings from Carmen. So thank you, Carmen. We saw very briefly one of the elections there. I suppose that's something that if you know something about Israeli society, Robin, you realise, that on the whole, Israelis don't apologise, and certainly they're not kind of polite culture like we are in Britain, apologising everything. But I think the point that Naftali Bennett wanted to make is that we should not say sorry for being Israelis, that we should be proud of who we are, our heritage, and the fact that we are fulfilment of biblical prophecy dating back to the prophets over 2,000-3,000 years.
Look, I mean, he did it in a very humorous way. I just wanted to say, as an aside, it is wonderful being on this programme. It is just not like the BBC. It really isn't. Which, please take that as a compliment. But
thank you.
But you know, this idea that Israel should be apologising. This is the central message. Underlying, or not the central message, it's the subliminal message which percolates through all the other messages that come from Western capitals about Israel. That Israel should really be sorry for what it is, which is a Jewish and democratic state, which has the audacity to defend itself. And I think that, of course, Naftali Bennett did it in a very humorous way. You know, his self-deprecating humour was refreshing. You know, he did it in a very Israeli style. But it's a serious message, because this is what the international community wants Israel to do. And I think that, you know, I don't think his party has done quite as well as it did last time, according to the exit polls, but he's still an important player in Israeli politics. And I think that message will resonate across Israeli society to quite a significant degree.
So let's have a look at one of the political election broadcasts or advertisements put out by Benjamin Netanyahu's party, the Likud.
مكانتي من ورا فني مشوه شارعا شعبي لشعبي ما له أي معنى خروجي من الأرض مسألة وقت فقط وعمل للأحسن إحنا جيم ليغوش اللي محشلين خوس مولا شكرا يا واد أنا بدي أندفن بنفس المقبرة اندفن فيها جدي ومن طفولتي بحلم لما أكبر أصير جندي مع الوقت اكتشفت لمين بدي أنتمي محمود عباس فتح حماس ولا
Robert, I know that the Islamic State poses a threat to British security, with a number of young and impressionable British Muslims, including young British Muslim girls, going out to join ISIS in Syria and Iraq. But, you know, we don't have to fear that the army that is the Islamic State are going to invade Britain with an army. Yet that is one of the messages that the Likud and certainly Netanyahu's campaign want to send out in this election, is look who's on our doorstep.
I think that's right, and I think that it's, you know, ISIS is obviously in our minds, but I mean Hamas is ever present, and Hezbollah, and any number of other groups as well, to Israeli minds. And I think that message is something that, look, it's obviously, you know, people might say from Western eyes it was quite crass, it was very blunt, but sometimes, you know, why not just tell it like it is, if you see things that way, and that's the message that Likud put across, and that's the style of the party, and it reflects the very fraught security circumstances in which Israel finds itself.
I just want to read out a few more of your emails and text messages. It's always good to hear from you. This one says, hello, I'd like to find out what your thoughts are concerning our duty as children of God and brothers and sisters of our Israeli brethren concerning voting in the UK elections, which are up and coming. Which of the political parties are committed to supporting Israel and more aligned to the values which we as Christians live by according to God's word? Maybe I can answer the
I mean, it's, you know, the short answer is that no political party has a majority view which is within itself, which is fully supportive of Israel. There are significantly larger sections of it just has to be said, this is the reality, of the political right, which in our case is the Conservative Party as the leading party, which will be pro-Israel. But the fact is that foreign policy is not necessarily driven by the politicians we elect. It's driven by the foreign policy bureaucracy, which in our case is the Foreign Office, which has a pretty sort of shameful record, frankly, in its attitude towards Israel. There are very strong currents within the Foreign Office that want to recognise Hamas, for example. If David Cameron wins the election, we will surely see more of the same, which will be kind of a bit of sort of shilly-shallying about Israel, occasional sort of strong support the moment Israel's attacked. Sometimes they'll be supportive, but then the support fades away, as we saw during Operation Protective Edge last year. The Liberal Democrats are probably the most hostile party to Israel in the country. The Labour Party has very strong hostility as well, although there is a kind of residual kind of old-fashioned left-wing Zionism, which is still present, although I'm afraid it's diminishing, and there are people who say it's actually vanishing. Frankly, if you want the straight answer to the question, if Israel is your primary concern, then you'll vote Conservative at the British elections.
Yeah, essentially because the Conservatives did veto plans put through by backbench MPs in supporting a unilateral Palestinian state, or recognition of a Palestinian state outside of the negotiated framework, which the Labour Party endorsed wholeheartely. So
yeah, I mean, that vote in Parliament was a non-binding resolution, and the government didn't follow it, which is in sharp distinction, for example, like with, for example, Sweden, where the government itself has endorsed that position.
Absolutely. So we're down to the last few minutes of the programme, so we've got to sum up. I'll try and get through a few of your emails here. This one is from Tracy, so it's great to hear from Tracy. This one says, "Hi Simon, great show. It's wonderful news that it looks as though Netanyahu has been re-elected. The most precious country in the world needs a strong leader who's going to back down to this politically correct world. I love the fact that he will not compromise the safety of Israel for the sake of appeasing a Muslim US president. I wish our Prime Minister had 100 of his courage, morals and strength." And that's shalom and blessings from Tracy. So thank you for that one, Tracy. This one says, "How do you know giving peace a chance won't work? Look at what Labour did in Northern Ireland. The difference is the two parties became exhausted. There is a totally different setup to the peace process in Northern Ireland to the one in Israel. Israel's surrounded by enemies who want her destruction, and the fact that's why she has such a strong force. She has Hamas to her south, which is committed to Israel's destruction. If you want to read that, then just read Hamas's Covenant Charter. The same with Hezbollah in the north. And now we have ISIS as well. Look what's also happening to the Christian communities in the Middle East. We'll say that unless there is fundamental reform of Palestinian society, then we're not going to see peace anytime soon, sadly. 2 minutes left of the programme. So, Robin, I'm going to let you sum up. I think one of the things we need to take out of this programme is the vibrancy of Israeli democracy. And instead of the world maybe criticising Israel for re-electing Bibi Netanyahu, as it would seem as this programme's going live, instead the world should be bracing the one true democracy in the Middle East that has such a vibrant, strong democracy, which is probably the envy of the Western world, with a turnout of nearly 72%.
It's very interesting. If you look, we're in Britain, which is still part of the European Union. If you look at the European Union, 11 countries were communist countries, non-democracies until 1989, 1990. We had Spain, Portugal and Greece that didn't become democracies until the mid-1970s. Israel has been a very vibrant democracy since its inception in 1947, well, in fact 1948. It has longer and deeper traditions of democracy than a very significant proportion of the countries in the European Union. It is obviously the most democratic country in the Middle East, and I think that is something to be celebrated. But I think one of the problems that Europe has is that it's sort of moved, the way the European Union has moved in its own attitudes towards governments in Europe, is that if you don't get the right result, then they start getting very petulant about the democratic process that put them into power. And we saw that with Berlusconi, we've seen it, their interference in Greece and all sorts of places. The European Union has no right to lecture anybody, let alone Israel, about democratic values. Israel is not only the most democratic country in the Middle East, it is certainly among the top, I would certainly put it in the top 5 most democratic countries in the world.
Robin, I just want to thank you so much for being my guest on this special Israeli election programme, and I want to thank all of you who have joined in. Let's continue to pray for Israel, let's continue to pray for the Israeli Prime Minister, and let's thank you for watching this special Israeli election programme. And it's shalom and good night from us.
The programme you've been watching was made possible because of viewer support for the Revelation Foundation. Programmes take time, effort and money. If you'd like to make similar programmes possible, then please send your gift to the Revelation Foundation. The details are on the screen. All of us at Revelation TV want to thank you for viewing this important message and to welcome you to explore further all of our programming. There are so many ways of watching Revelation TV: by Sky, Freesat, Freeview HD, the Roku box, and of course through the internet. If you would like further information on Revelation TV, please contact our office on info@revelationtv.com or by writing or ringing the address and telephone number on the screen. With God's blessing and your support, we're believing for Revelation TV to reach an ever-growing audience with the truths of the gospel. Thank you, and God bless you.
This is an appeal to help our brothers and sisters who are desperate for God's Word. Mai Ling longs for a Bible, but she's too poor to buy one. This is the story right across China, where 7,000 people give their lives to Christ every week. Many have no hope of ever affording a Bible of their own. Yet with just £4 a month, you can provide someone young or old with their very first Bible. Through Bible a Month, you can give the Bible to people desperate for God's Word all over the world, people who are hungry to read and understand the good news. To give, simply search Bible a Month online, and you could start changing lives with every Bible you put into someone's hands. It's as easy as that. Please give online now. Thank you so much.
Right now, millions of children are in grave danger. All over the world, children as young as 2 or 3 struggle to survive on the streets. Hungry, sick from disease, and at constant risk of exploitation. It's filthy and it's dangerous, but this is their home. Just £3 could provide a child with safe shelter for 3 days. Please text PROTECT to 70111. UNICEF will use your gift to get hot meals to hungry children, to help them learn to read and write, to help make them safe. But tonight, millions of children around the world will sleep on streets like this one. Every minute they're here, they're in danger. Can you imagine your child in a place like this? I can't. Please don't wait. Text PROTECT to 70111 and give £3 to help make a child safe tonight. Thank you.
This is an appeal to stop dirty water deaths. Sadly, you won't see it in the news. But today, dirty water will kill 1,400 children, more than malaria and AIDS combined. These children have no choice but to drink water from rivers, swamps, and stagnant ponds every day. Imagine your child drinking dirty water, knowing the next sip could kill. Right now, you can help save a child's life. Simply text TAP to 70123 to give WaterAid £3. WaterAid already has teams in place to install the pipes, pumps and taps that will bring clean water to children at risk. They just need your support. In the next minute, dirty water will kill another child. So please, don't wait to save a child's life. Text TAP to 70123 to give £3 now. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Hugh Osgood, and I'm here to invite you to join me every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. We have a great time together studying God's Word, and we always pick up fresh insights which help us as we're living out our Christian life day by day. So do join me, Hugh Osgood, Sunday mornings, 10 a.m, and I look forward to seeing you.